Hi friends, tonight we're stepping back in time into a world where your breath turns into mist before you even open the crooked wooden door of your cottage. The night air bites like teeth and the frozen ground crunches under your bare feet. Imagine that chill creeping through your bones before you've even had your morning crust of bread. See too, if you were dropped into a medieval village in the middle of winter, chances are you wouldn't last long. But tonight, let's imagine how people actually survived. You wake before dawn, but the world is still dark. Winter mornings in medieval Europe arrive late, and the cold keeps you buried under scratchy blankets, stuffed with straw. The roof groans with frost, and icy drafts sneak through the cracks. You and your family sleep tangled together, not for comfort, but for survival. Your breath mixes with theirs in the stale, smoky air. The hearth has gone cold overnight, leaving only faint embers. Restarting the fire is the first battle of the day. You bend low, blowing gently, feeding it twigs, moss, or even dried dung if wood is scarce. Sometimes you fail, and the whole family shivers until noon. Breakfast? Don't expect much. Yesterday's bread, hard as stone, maybe dipped in weak ale or thin milk. It hurts your teeth, but hunger doesn't care. Outside, the village is silent under heavy snow. The animals must be checked. Chickens huddle, cows steam in their stalls. Sheep's breath rises like little clouds. Without them, there is no survival. In fact, some villagers even smeared goose fat on their faces before heading outside, believing it protected against frost. Strange by today's standards, but back then, it made sense. The fields lie useless, buried in ice. Work shifts indoors, weaving, mending, sharpening tools. When weather allows, men scavenge the woods for firewood, though taking from the Lord's forest could mean harsh punishment. Still, survival often mattered more than rules. As the day drags on, the sky rarely brightens. The cold makes every task heavy, every breath sting. At night, you huddle by the fire, staring into the flames, praying spring will come. But every dawn brings the same harsh truth. Endure another day. Your cottage isn't the cozy stone house of fairy tales. It's one room, timber-framed, with walls of clay, straw, and dung. 6 inches thick, offering little more protection than a tent. The roof drips when ice melts. Smoke stings your eyes because chimneys are rare. Windows, just scraps of greased cloth that rattle in the wind. In winter, families even brought animals inside. Not for love, but for heat. Imagine trying to sleep with a pig pressed against your legs. Beds, storage, fire pit, all crammed into one smoky room. Privacy? None. Comfort? Forgotten. Survival? Always. And then there's fuel. Wood is precious, often forbidden. So families burn peat, dung, even bones, believed to scare away evil spirits. Without constant tending, the fire dies and frost creeps in. Some nights, one person stays awake just to keep embers alive until morning. Food is no less of a struggle. Salted pork, mouldy bread, shriveled onions, these are treasures, stretched as far as possible. Bread was mixed with acorns or chestnut meal, meat boiled to soften its salt and chew. Hunger rarely allowed choice. So, in a medieval winter, life wasn't about comfort, it was about enduring. Each day meant one thing: keep the fire burning, keep breathing, and hope tomorrow would come. But survival in winter wasn't only about food or fire, it was also about illness. The cold crept into every corner of life, and with it came disease. Coughs and fevers spread quickly inside smoke-filled cottages. A single sickness could pass from child to parent to grandparent within days. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals. People relied on herbs, sage for sore throats, garlic for coughs, honey for wounds. Sometimes it helped, often it didn't. And then there was the cold itself. Frostbite wasn't a word most villagers knew, but they knew the pain. Blackened fingers, numb toes, aching joints. Children were especially at risk. Many never saw their 5th winter. Night brought new dangers. Wolves prowled the edges of villages, drawn by hunger. A thin wooden door was the only barrier between your family and sharp teeth in the dark. Even worse than wolves was the silence of hunger inside your own home. Parents sometimes skipped meals to feed their children. Some winters, entire villages nearly starved before spring. Religion played its part too. People prayed for mercy, lighting candles in freezing chapels, believing illness and famine were punishments from God. Superstitions filled the gaps where knowledge failed. A string of garlic hung above the door, charms tucked under a child's blanket, whispers of witches blamed for failed harvests. And through it all, Life had to continue. Clothes were patched and repatched until nothing remained but threads. Shoes, if you were lucky to own them, were stuffed with straw to keep your feet from freezing. When they fell apart, many simply walked barefoot through the snow. Yet, despite the hardship, there was resilience. Families gathered close, telling stories by the fire. Villagers shared what little they had with neighbors. Hope lived in the promise that spring, though distant, would eventually come. To us, winter means holidays, hot drinks, and warm blankets. But to them, winter was a test of endurance. Each sunrise was not just another day. It was proof that they had survived one more night. Yet, even in the harshest winters, people found ways to bring light into the darkness. Life wasn't only about enduring, it was also about celebrating the fact that they were still alive. Winter meant festivals. The most important was Christmastide, stretching 12 days from December 25th into January. Villagers decorated with whatever they could find: holly, ivy, mistletoe, green branches brought inside to remind them that life still existed, even when fields were dead and white with snow. Food was scarce, but during the holidays, families saved their best: a salted ham pulled from a barrel, a carefully hoarded jug of ale, or a loaf baked from the finest grain. Children laughed around smoky hearths, clutching small gifts carved from wood or stitched from scraps of cloth. In some villages, neighbors gathered at a communal hall or even in a barn, where fires blazed larger than any single cottage could afford. Singing, storytelling, and dancing filled the long, dark nights. The cold still gnawed at their bones, but for a moment, warmth came not only from fire, but from fellowship. Even older pagan traditions survived in whispers. Bonfires lit at midwinter were said to chase away evil spirits. Candles flickered in windows to guide good fortune to the household, and villagers told tales of spirits roaming on the longest nights. The wild hunt sweeping across frozen skies, reminding everyone that the season belonged not just to the living, but to forces beyond their control. But laughter, song, and prayer helped people endure. These celebrations were not luxuries, they were survival in another form. Because winter was not only a battle against the elements, it was a battle of the spirit. Without moments of joy, hope itself would freeze. So imagine yourself once more, stepping outside into the pale light of a medieval winter morning. Your stomach growls, your fingers sting, the air cuts your lungs, but smoke still rises from your cottage chimney. Yet, even in the harshest winters, winter did not just test the body, it tested the mind. Imagine weeks passing with the same grey sky, the same frost on the roof, the same meals of hard bread and salted meat. The sameness weighed heavily. Some described winter as a kind of prison, where the walls were made not of stone, but of ice and darkness. That's where community became vital. Villagers relied on each other as much as on their own families. Neighbors helped repair sagging roofs, shared fuel when fires burned too low, and sometimes pulled food to keep a child from starving. In such conditions, survival was rarely individual, it was collective. But even community had rules. Medieval society ran on hierarchy. Lords and landowners controlled the forests and fields. The poor walked carefully between survival and punishment. Gathering too much firewood or poaching a deer in desperation could lead to brutal consequences. And yet, when the snow was deepest and the roads impassable, enforcement often softened. Many quietly bent the rules. Knowing the Lord's men couldn't reach every corner of the frozen countryside, faith also bound people together. Churches offered not warmth, but purpose. Sermons reminded villagers that suffering was temporary, that spring was God's promise. Bells rang out over snow-covered roofs, their sound cutting through the silence like a thread, pulling people back to hope. Still, winter could break the spirit. Isolation was common. Travel became almost impossible. Entire families might go weeks without seeing anyone beyond their immediate neighbors. For some, the loneliness was as sharp as the cold. Stories filled the silence. Around fires, people told tales of saints who braved the cold, of ghosts wandering the snowy fields, of wolves that spoke in human voices. Some stories warned, others comforted, but all gave shape to the fears of long nights. Children played even in hardship. They chased each other through snowdrifts, carved toys from scraps of wood, or tossed frozen clumps of earth like snowballs. Their laughter was a reminder that even in the bleakest months, life pushed forward. And then there were marriages, births, and funerals. Winter did not pause life cycles. Babies arrived in cold cottages, wrapped in whatever scraps of wool could be spared. The old sometimes slipped away quietly, their bodies too frail for the season. The living carried them to frozen churchyards, breaking the ground for shallow graves. These rituals reminded every villager winter took, but it also allowed life to continue. The cold was a teacher. It taught endurance. It taught humility before nature. And above all, it taught the value of every small fire, every shared loaf, every breath that turned into mist in the frozen air. And then, after months of grey skies, smoke-filled huts, and the endless bite of frost, something changes. It begins quietly. A trickle of water where ice once ruled. A patch of earth peeking through the melting snow. The first birdsong breaking the silence of a frozen world. For medieval villagers, these small signs were nothing less than miracles. Fields that had slept under white blankets slowly revealed themselves. Frozen rivers softened, and fishermen returned with their nets. Children, pale and thin from months indoors, ran barefoot in muddy paths, chasing the promise of warmth. But the most important sign was the soil. As soon as it thawed, men and women rushed to the fields with plows, oxen, and calloused hands. Every seed planted was a prayer, every furrow a bargain with the future. The memory of hunger sharpened their determination. Spring was not just a season, it was survival reborn. Festivals returned too, this time brighter. Bells rang louder, not just calling to prayer, but celebrating life itself. Maypoles rose in village squares, flowers crowned the heads of children, and music carried across the green hills. The hardships of winter were not forgotten. They lived in every wrinkle, every scar, every story told by the hearth. But spring transformed those scars into strength. Families who had survived another winter gathered in thanks, knowing that their endurance had carried them through the cruelest test of the year. For us today, the seasons are an inconvenience. We complain about cold winds, wet shoes, or shorter days. But for the people of the Middle Ages, winter was a gauntlet, and spring, it was proof that life could not be broken. So when the first flower pushed its way through the thawing ground, when the sun finally warmed the earth again, it wasn't just a change in weather, it was a victory. A reminder that no matter how deep the cold, how long the dark, the world always returns to light. The story of a medieval winter is not just history, it is a mirror, a reminder of how fragile life once was, and how resilient people had to be. Imagine the courage it took to face a season that could last 5 months, where every day was a gamble against hunger, cold, and disease. And yet, families endured, villages endured, humanity endured. We may not fight with frostbite or famine today, but our winters are different kinds of trial. Loneliness, hardship, uncertainty. They come to us in other forms. The lesson of the Middle Ages is clear. Survival is never just about strength. It is about unity, about sharing what little we have, about holding on to hope when the nights are longest. So, the next time you light a candle on a cold evening or sit near a warm fire, remember the countless generations who once did the same, clutching their children, telling their stories, praying for dawn. Centuries have passed since those cold medieval nights, but the memory of them lingers in the stones of old villages, in the ruins of castles, in the silent churchyards where frost once claimed so many lives. If you walk through Europe today, through narrow cobblestone streets or past crumbling walls, you can still feel the echo of those winters. Historians often call the Middle Ages a time of darkness, but in truth it was a time of endurance. Every candle lit in a frozen chapel, every loaf divided among hungry hands, every fire that kept a child alive through the night. Those were victories, quiet victories, forgotten by time, yet essential to the survival of humanity. And if you listen closely, you realize something. We are not so different. Our world has changed, but our fears remain. The cold may no longer stalk us from the forests, but we still know hunger. We still know sickness, and we still fight loneliness in the long nights of our own lives. The lesson of the medieval winter is not about the cold at all. It is about the fire. Not just the fire in the hearth, but the fire in the human spirit, the stubborn flame that refuses to die, even when surrounded by endless darkness. So when we look back across the centuries, past the frozen rivers, past the wolves at the edge of the village, past the silent fields buried in snow, We see not just survival but triumph as the last embers fade in the hearth and the long night settles once again. Imagine yourself in that medieval cottage. Outside, the snow still falls. The wind still rattles the wooden shutters. But inside, there is warmth, small, fragile, but enough. That is what winter survival meant in the Middle Ages. Not conquering the cold, but outlasting it. Not defeating hunger, but learning to share. So, not escaping death, but embracing life whenever it appeared. Whether in a newborn's cry, a family's laughter, or a song whispered against the dark. History is not only written in battles and kings, it is written in the ordinary courage of ordinary people who carried fire through the cold so the world could keep turning. And so, as we end this journey through a medieval winter, remember this: their world may be gone, but their lesson is eternal, because every winter, in every age, teaches us the same truth. The night is long, the cold is cruel, but the dawn always comes. The cold does not only test your body, it tests your spirit. In a medieval winter, survival was never only about food and fire. It was also about hope. You rise on another bleak morning, your stomach aching, your fingers stiff, and yet you hear the sound of church bells echoing through the icy air. Faith was the invisible blanket villagers pulled over themselves when wool and straw were not enough. Inside the wooden church, candles flicker, their small flames pushing against the darkness. The priest's breath is visible in the freezing nave as he speaks of endurance, of God's will, of heaven beyond this suffering. Villagers kneel on hard stone floors, their knees aching, but they draw strength from the ritual. It is not comfort in the way of warmth or food, but comfort in the way of meaning. And then, when the calendar reached its darkest points, came the small bursts of joy, the midwinter feast days, Christmas, Epiphany, or the feast of a local saint. Moments when the whole village tried to forget the hunger gnawing at their bellies. A pig might be slaughtered, ale might be poured, and songs would rise into the smoky rafters. For a night or two, life was not only about survival, it was about celebration. But even then, shadows lingered. Superstitions thrived in the frozen silence. People whispered of spirits that prowled the dark woods, of witches who stole milk from cows, of demons who slipped through cracks in the walls when the fire burned too low. Families clutched charms, hung dried herbs, or even tossed salt into the flames to drive away unseen terrors. The night was long, and fear made it even longer. Still, the rhythm of faith and fear carried people forward. A prayer here, a song there, a story by the hearth to chase away despair. Because in the end, survival was not only measured in bread and meat, it was measured in the ability to believe that spring would return, even when the snow piled higher than the roof. Outside, the village sleeps under its icy blanket. Smoke curls slowly from chimneys, rising into the star-pricked sky. And within every cottage, by every faint flame, beats the same fragile determination to endure one more night. Weeks blur into months. You lose count of how many times you've blown on dying embers, or how many loaves of hard bread you've gnawed in silence. Hunger has become a constant companion, cold as shadow that never leaves your side. But then, one morning, something changes. You step outside, and for the first time, the air feels less sharp. The snow under your boots gives way to patches of damp earth. Water trickles where ice once ruled. The world is still grey, still tired, but there is movement. The frost is loosening its grip. The first signs are small. Buds appear on bare branches, hesitant, fragile. Birds return, their calls breaking months of silence. The villagers notice, and though their faces remain drawn from hunger, their eyes begin to soften with cautious hope. Yet spring is not salvation, not immediately. When the snow melts, it leaves behind mud so thick it swallows carts and clogs boots. Stored food is nearly gone, and the first green shoots are weeks away from being edible. This is the hungry gap, the cruelest part of the year when winter's stores are spent. But the new harvest is still out of reach. Families scrape by on whatever is left: boiled nettles, dried beans, scraps of grain stretched into thin porridge. Children's bellies swell from malnutrition, and elders grow weaker by the day. You tell yourself the earth is waking, that warmth is returning, but the waiting is harder now than ever. Still, each dawn brings a little more light. The sun lingers longer, the air softens, and with every passing day, the fear of winter slowly fades into the memory of survival. By mid-spring, lambs stumble through the fields, their bleats mixing with laughter as children chase them. Farmers bend to the soil, planting seeds with hands still raw from frost, whispering prayers that the harvest will be kinder this year. And as the first true warmth spreads through the village, you finally understand what winter has taught you, that survival is not about conquering the cold, but about enduring it long enough to see the earth reborn. The fire in your hearth burns brighter now, no longer a desperate spark, but a steady flame. Outside, smoke rises from chimneys, not as a plea for survival, but as a promise of life returning. As winter drags on, the cupboards grow emptier. Salted meat shrinks in its barrel, the fat gone sour. The bread loaves are smaller, stretched thin with filler, until they taste more of earth than grain. Sometimes, hunger presses so hard that families boil thin gruel made from scraps of flour and water, barely more than paste. Children lick the bowls clean, hoping for another spoonful that never comes. There are no fresh vegetables, no fruit. Scurvy lurks in the shadows of winter, though villagers don't know its name. They only know their gums bleed, their teeth ache, and their bodies weaken as the weeks wear on. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletons show widespread malnutrition during harsh winters, bone growth often stunted in children, evidence of hunger repeating year after year. In some regions, children were told stories of winter hags who would steal food from greedy hands. It was less about magic and more a lesson in rationing what little you had. The cold does not come alone. It brings sickness. With smoke choking the air, lungs rattle with coughs that never heal. Fevers spread quickly in crowded one-room cottages. There are no doctors, only wise women with herbs, prayers, and guesswork. If the local priest blesses you, perhaps it helps. If not, death often slips quietly through the door at night. A child doesn't wake in the morning. An elder coughs himself into silence. There is no burial in frozen ground. Bodies sometimes rest in barns, wrapped in cloth, until the soil thaws enough to open a grave. The village mourns quietly. There is no energy for wailing, only the whispered prayer that you won't be next. In many regions, mortality rates in winter were highest not from hunger, but from illness aggravated by poor ventilation, malnutrition, and the cold itself. And yet people endure. Faith becomes a blanket no frost can pierce. The church bell still rings, its sound muffled by snow, summoning villagers to kneel together in smoky chapels. They pray for spring, for mercy, for survival. The priest speaks of trials sent by God, of rewards waiting in heaven for those who endure suffering here on earth. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers carried charms of dried herbs or carved crosses, believing they would ward off frostbite or illness. A patch of rosemary or sage was thought to protect the lungs. At night, families whisper stories around the hearth of saints who braved winters with nothing but faith, of spirits that wandered snowy forests, of hope that the sun will return. Every task becomes heavier. Water must still be fetched, but streams are frozen. So you smash ice with stones, your hands raw from the cold, hauling back buckets that freeze on the walk home. Laundry is rare. Clothes stiffen with sweat and smoke until they almost stand on their own. The smell clings to you, but vanity has no place here. Warmth matters more than cleanliness. Mending tools, weaving wool, patching leaks, these become the daily rhythm. The hours pass not with joy, but with constant small labours that might make tomorrow less harsh. In the heart of winter, neighbours lean on one another or turn against each other. When fuel runs low, gossip sharpens. Who has more wood stacked behind their cottage? Who slaughtered an extra pig in autumn and is now hoarding? Whispers spread like sparks in dry thatch. Sometimes villagers gather for communal tasks, like repairing fences or baking in the shared oven. Other times, disputes erupt, knives flashing over nothing more than a stolen bundle of sticks. Historical fact. Records from medieval courts show winter disputes over resources were common, especially fuel and grain. Desperation often pushed ordinary villagers into petty theft, and punishments could be severe even in freezing months. Nights in winter feel eternal. Darkness swallows half the day. Candles are scarce, made from tallow that smokes and stinks, so most people work only by firelight. Children grow restless, adults slip into silence, staring at flames until eyes grow heavy. Dreams are filled with frost and hunger. Sometimes, if the sky clears, you step outside. The stars are brilliant, sharper than you've ever seen. The snow glitters as if the earth itself has cracked into diamonds. For a moment, you feel small beneath the cold heavens, a single breath in an endless winter. And then, after months of white silence, something changes. The air feels less sharp. Snow melts into trickling streams. The ground softens, mud swallowing boots where ice once reigned. The first green shoots pierce the thawed earth. They are more than plants. They are hope. Villagers gather outside. Faces turn to the pale sun as if greeting an old friend. The animals wander further from their stalls, grazing hungrily on the first grass. Children splash in puddles, laughing at last. Historical fact: spring was not a relief for all. The hungry gap arrived when winter stores ran out, but the new harvest had not yet grown. Survival still meant stretching meals carefully. Quirky tidbit: some villagers celebrated with first bread, the first loaf baked from fresh spring grain, shared among families as a sign that they had endured another year. Looking back, you realize that winter was not just a season. It was a test. Every breath of smoke from your chimney meant another day alive. Every ember kept glowing meant hope had not died. You did not thrive. You did not live in comfort. You endured, and in the medieval world that was enough, because surviving winter was not about conquering the cold. It was about clinging to life day after day, frost after frost, until the earth softened again. And when it did, the village breathed together, knowing they had beaten the frozen dark one more time. By midwinter, the world outside feels endless and cruel. The snow no longer looks magical. It's a prison wall. Roads vanish under drifts, cutting the village off from trade, news, and sometimes even the nearest church. Inside, tempers grow shorter. Families confined together in one smoky room cannot escape each other's coughs, snores, or muttered complaints. Quarrels spark over scraps of food, over whose turn it is to stoke the fire, over who wasted kindling the night before. And yet, when wolves howl beyond the forest edge, or when the wind screams like a banshee against the shutters, everyone huddles closer again, reminded that the real enemy is outside. Historical fact: wolves were a genuine threat in medieval Europe, especially during harsh winters when prey was scarce. Records show villages in France, Germany, and Eastern Europe organizing hunts after packs ventured too close to settlements. Though fields lie buried, work does not stop. Women spin wool until their fingers ache, twisting thread by the faint glow of the hearth. Men mend tools, sharpening sickles for a harvest that feels impossibly far away. Children are sent to gather water, arms straining against buckets that freeze solid before they make it home. When weather allows, the stronger men trudge into the woods, axes on shoulders, searching for wood. They return bent double under loads that seem heavier than themselves, their faces raw from wind. Inside, the smell of damp wool, sweat, smoke, and animals blends into one thick atmosphere. You live in it, you breathe it, and you can never truly escape it. In some areas, villagers warmed their feet by placing hot stones from the hearth into cloth wrappings. They called them foot stones. Simple, crude, but it kept frostbite at bay. As the year turns and days grow slightly longer, paradoxically, hunger becomes worse. Winter stores run thin, yet spring crops are still months away. This cruel season is known as the hungry gap. You scrape the bottom of the grain barrel, hoping for enough flour to make one last loaf. Salt meat has grown tough and rancid. Onions and beans are shriveled shadows of themselves. Rats grow bold, chewing through sacks while you sleep. The meals shrink to thin gruel, broth flavored by a single bone, bread stretched with ground acorns or weeds pulled from patches of thawed soil. Historical fact: the hungry gap was one of the deadliest parts of the agricultural year in medieval Europe, with starvation common even among hard-working families. Faith is not just comfort, it's survival. Villagers cling to prayers, believing that saints watch over them in the frozen dark. The priest's words carry heavy weight, teaching that suffering now earns eternal reward later. But fear thrives alongside faith. Superstitions grow sharper in winter. People whisper that strange lights in the snow are spirits, or that sudden sickness is caused by curses. In some regions, Villagers placed iron nails or knives near doorways, believing they would repel evil spirits that prowled during long winter nights. The churchyard fills slowly, quietly. Every few weeks, another family carries a loved one to be buried in frozen ground. When the soil is too hard, bodies are wrapped and kept in barns, waiting for thaw. Children are often the first to go. The weak cannot endure hunger and cold together. The grief of parents is muted, not because they don't feel it, but because they must carry on. Survival leaves little room for mourning. Historical fact: infant and child mortality rates in medieval Europe were staggering. In harsh winters, survival beyond the age of 5 was often considered a blessing. And yet, even in the harshest nights, resilience shows itself. Families tell stories to distract children from their rumbling stomachs. Neighbors share a loaf of bread or a handful of beans, knowing that tomorrow the favor might be returned. Mothers sing lullabies against the howling wind. Fathers mend tools by firelight, sharpening blades for fields they cannot yet touch. Children carve toys from scraps of wood, laughter briefly pushing back the shadows. The human spirit, though bruised, refuses to vanish. When spring finally stirs, it feels almost unreal. Snow softens into slush. Streams break free with a roar, and the sun lingers a little longer each day. But spring does not bring instant relief. The fields must be ploughed, seeds sown, and livestock driven to pasture. Bodies weakened by winter labor through exhaustion, pushing forward because they must. Only when the first shoots of green rise from the earth does the village truly breathe again. Bread baked from fresh grain, however coarse, tastes like a miracle. Some villages held plough Sunday ceremonies, blessing the plough and fields in early spring, hoping to secure a good harvest and prevent another hungry winter. Winter has ended, but its scars remain. Ribs show through thin shirts. Coughs linger in smoky lungs. Families count who is missing from the hearth circle. And yet, the cottages still stand. The fields are ready. The village endures. Because that was survival in the medieval world. Not conquering the cold, not thriving, but simply enduring, holding on breath by breath, ember by ember, until the frozen dark gave way to the fragile light of spring. Winter is not a story of one night. It's weeks upon weeks, each day blurring into the next until you lose track of time itself. You wake in darkness. You eat in darkness. You sleep in darkness. The sun, when it appears, feels like a visitor who barely stays long enough to say hello before retreating again behind the clouds. Every morning begins the same way, coaxing the embers, checking the animals, scraping together a meal. It feels like a routine carved into your bones, but routine is the only thing keeping you alive, and yet it wears on you. The same smoke in your lungs, the same ache in your teeth from hard bread, the same numbness in your fingers when you haul water. Survival is repetition, not glorious, not romantic, but heavy and unending. If you are a child, winter feels like punishment. The games of summer are gone. No fields to run in, no streams to splash through. You sit in the smoky dark, carving toys from scraps of wood, listening to the groans of the wind. Your parents hush you. Often noise wastes energy. Food is too little for growing bodies, so you are always hungry. Your belly aches at night, and sometimes your parents give you their own share of bread while pretending they are already full. Historical fact: in some records, parents were found to survive winters by prioritizing food for children, though infant mortality still remained devastatingly high. If you are a woman, winter is no reprieve. The spinning wheel never stops. Wool must be spun into thread, thread woven into cloth, cloth patched into garments to replace the ones stiff with frost. Your hands are raw, cracked, bleeding from cold. Smoke stains your skin, and the smell of the hearth clings to you until you can't remember what clean air tastes like. Meals must be stretched endlessly, a few beans boiled into broth, a sliver of meat to flavor porridge. You pray quietly over the pot each night, hoping it will be enough to keep your family through one more day. If you are a man, the forest calls you every few days, not for adventure, but for necessity. The Lord owns the tall trees, so you creep along the edge, searching for fallen branches, brushwood, and scraps. Every step is a gamble. Take too much, and the Lord's men may catch you. Do too little, and your fire will die. You drag the load home, shoulders groaning, sweat freezing on your skin. Every twig feels like treasure. When you dump it in the corner, your family looks at it as if it were gold. Historical fact: court rolls from the Middle Ages are full of cases of peasants fined or punished for taking wood from the Lord's forests. Yet without it, families could not endure winter. Sometimes winter lulls the village into a silence that feels eerie. Snow muffles footsteps. Smoke drifts lazily into the grey sky. Even animals move slowly, their breath rising in thick clouds. But silence is never peace. It is a waiting silence. Beneath it is hunger. Beneath it is fear. Everyone wonders, will the food last? Will the firewood hold? Will sickness come for us? On such days, you find yourself staring at the horizon, searching for something, anything that promises life beyond this frozen cage. Sometimes when the hearth is your lifeline, but it is also your greatest danger. Sparks leap toward the thatch roof with every shift of the logs. One ember in the wrong place, and your home becomes a torch. With no fire, you freeze. With too much fire, you burn. Families live balanced on that knife edge every night. Some peasants hung wet rags from the rafters near the hearth, hoping the damp cloth would catch stray sparks before the thatch did. Crude, but sometimes effective. Even in the frozen dark, the calendar still turns. Midwinter feasts, church holidays, and saints' festivals break the monotony, if only for a night. Villagers gather in the churchyard, their breath clouding the air, singing hymns into the cold. Sometimes the Lord allows a gift of food or ale, and for a brief moment bellies are full and spirits rise. Then the feast ends and hunger returns. But those moments matter. They remind you that you are not alone in the cold, that the village survives together. Winter does not pass without leaving its mark. Your joints ache constantly. Your teeth, ground down by gritty bread, throb with pain. Coughs linger in your chest for weeks, rattling like stones in a jar. Children grow thinner. Elders wither faster. Every winter peels a layer from the body, and some never recover when spring comes. Historical fact: many medieval skeletons show signs of chronic respiratory disease, tooth wear from gritty bread, and bone lesions linked to malnutrition, all made worse in long winters. The days stretch endlessly, each one bleeding into the next until the people forget what month it is. The only measure of time is the dwindling pile of firewood, the shrinking sack of grain, and the aching ribs that show beneath threadbare tunics. The cold presses in like a living thing, creeping under doors and gnawing at fingers and toes until they grow numb. Even in sleep, there is no escape. Dreams are haunted by visions of warm bread, green fields, and running water, only to dissolve into the cruel bite of frost when the eyes open again to darkness. The children weaken first. Their coughs echo through cottages at night, thin and ragged, sometimes silenced by dawn, in a way that makes the silence unbearable. Mothers cling to their little ones, rocking them close to the hearth, whispering prayers to saints whose names are nearly forgotten, begging them to keep death away. Fathers, hardened by labour, hide their fear behind silence, their eyes lingering too long on their children's faces, memorising them as if they know the snow may claim them before spring arrives. The church bells mark the rhythm of survival, not because they bring salvation, but because they remind the villagers that the Lord of the manor watches always. On Sundays, the villagers drag themselves across the frozen paths, huddled in cloaks that reek of smoke. Inside the cold stone church, the priest speaks of obedience, patience, and God's plan. His words rise into the vaulted ceiling, but in the pews, the people shift uneasily, their empty stomachs growling louder than their faith. They bow their heads, yet their thoughts are not on heaven but on the root cellar at home, on whether there is enough left to make a meal for the night. When snowstorms come, they arrive like walls of white fury. Wind screams across the fields, rattling shutters and filling every crack with icy breath. Families huddle together on the floor, covered in furs and wool, waiting out the storm as the roof groans under the weight of snow. Some cottages collapse, crushing the families inside, their cries smothered by wind until the storm moves on and the silence returns. The survivors emerge to find the world remade, fences buried, paths vanished, animals frozen where they stood. The land is a graveyard of snow. And yet, in the midst of despair, there are flickers of humanity. A neighbour shares a loaf of bread with another family, knowing full well that it means less for themselves. A midwife braves the cold to deliver a child, her hands shaking as she ties the cord, praying that both mother and infant will live through the night. A group of men, half-starved, gather in secret to hunt in the forbidden forest, risking the gallows for the chance to bring back a deer that might keep their village alive for one more week. In these small acts of defiance, survival becomes more than endurance. It becomes a quiet rebellion against the cruelty of the season. Nights are the hardest. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the orange glow of the hearth and the faint glitter of frost on the inside of the window panes. Wolves prowl at the edges of the village, their howls cutting through the silence, reminding the people that even beyond hunger and cold, other predators wait. Mothers press their children close. Fathers grip axes they can barely lift from weakness, and prayers murmur in the dark until exhaustion drags everyone into uneasy sleep. Then one morning, something changes. A drip of water falls from the roof. The air, still cold, carries a softness it did not before. When snowstorms come, they arrive like walls of white fury. Wind screams across the fields, rattling shutters and filling every crack with icy breath. Nights are the hardest. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the orange glow of the hearth and the faint glitter of frost on the inside of the window panes. Wolves prowl at the edges of the village, their howls cutting through the silence, reminding the people that even beyond hunger and cold, other predators wait. Mothers press their children close. Fathers grip axes they can barely lift from weakness, and prayers murmur in the dark until exhaustion drags everyone into uneasy sleep. Then, one morning, something changes. A drip of water falls from the roof. The air, still cold, carries a softness it did not before. Birds return, their voices thin but alive. Children point at the muddy patches appearing beneath the melting snow, their eyes wide as if they have seen a miracle. The people know spring will not arrive. Kindly floods, hunger and toil await, but for the first time in months, hope stirs. They survived the longest nights, and in the medieval world, that alone is victory.